My beautiful, cheesiest and loyalist family. Heavenly Father, I lift up my Mr. Peter Story's family to you. Shower them with endless love, unshakable peace, and overflowing joy. Heal their hearts, strengthen their souls, and bless their dreams. May every burden be lifted, every tear be replaced with laughter, and every moment be filled with love. Keep them safe, guide their paths, and let them always feel the warmth of this beautiful family. Amen. My beautiful family, how was the last story? Did it touch your heart? And to my new family members, welcome home. You are now part of something special, a family built on love and emotions. Do you tell your friends and family that I have a new family? That Mr. Peter Stories is growing with the most beautiful souls? Let them know, because love is meant to be shared. Are you happy with my work? Tell me, because your happiness is what keeps me going. Now, let's begin. A breathtaking story awaits, one filled with love, passion, and emotions that will touch your soul. Stay with me, my family, because this journey is only getting more beautiful. The pristine Alaskan winter of 1995 painted Sitka in shades of white and silver, transforming the small coastal town into a wonderland that seemed to exist in a snow globe of its own making. Against this backdrop of nature's purity, a story began to unfold. One that would challenge conventions, defy expectations, and prove that love, in its most innocent form, knows no boundaries. 7-year-old Edmund Moses stood at his bedroom window, watching snowflakes dance in the early morning light. His glacier blue eyes, inherited from generations of Norwegian ancestors, reflected the crystalline world outside. The Moses family had lived in Sitka for 3 generations, their history intertwined with the fishing industry that was the lifeblood of the community. Edmund's platinum blonde hair, almost white in certain lights, made him look like a child of winter itself. That morning marked the arrival of the Rosa family to their street, an event that would irreversibly change the course of young Edmund's life. Through the frost-kissed window, he watched a moving truck navigate the narrow street, followed by a modest sedan. His breath created small clouds on the glass as he pressed closer, curiosity getting the better of him. From the sedan emerged a girl his age, wrapped in a bright red coat that stood out against the monochromatic landscape like a cardinal in snow. McKenna Rosa's first step onto Alaskan soil was tentative, her dark eyes wide with wonder at the unfamiliar terrain. She had never seen snow before, having moved from sun-drenched Kenya, where her father had been a prominent professor of marine biology. Now, Dr. Rosa's expertise had brought them halfway across the world to the Sitka Sound Science Center. Edmund watched as McKenna tilted her head back, trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue. Her laughter, clear and bright, carried through the crisp morning air, making him smile without knowing why. Her ebony skin seemed to glow with an inner warmth that defied the frigid temperature, and her tight coils of black hair were partially contained by a handmade knit cap that her grandmother had made for the journey. Without fully understanding the momentum of the moment, Edmund rushed downstairs, nearly tripping over his untied shoelaces in his haste to get outside. His mother, Eleanor Moses, called after him to put on his coat, but he was already charging through the front door, sending a burst of cold air swirling through the house. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he made his way across the yard. McKenna noticed him approaching and lowered her arms, which had been spread wide as she spun in circles. They stood there for a moment, 2 children from vastly different worlds, measuring each other with the direct curiosity that only the young possess. "I'm Edmund," he said, his breath creating little clouds between them. "You've never seen snow before, have you?" McKenna shook her head, her smile revealing a small gap between her front teeth that would become one of her most endearing features. "I'm McKenna, and no, it's like the sky is falling, but beautiful." "Want to build a snowman?" Edmund asked, already bending down to gather snow in his mittened hands. "I'm an expert. I can teach you." And just like that, a friendship was born, as pure and natural as the snow that surrounded them. For the next several hours they rolled increasingly larger snowballs across the yard, their laughter echoing off the Victorian-style houses that lined their street. Edmund showed Makina how to pack the snow just right, while she suggested using her new scarf as the snowman's accessory. Their parents watched from their respective porches, sharing knowing looks as their children bridged cultural divides with the ease that only innocence allows. Mrs. Rosa brought out hot chocolate in thermal mugs, steam rising into the cold air as the children took breaks from their creation to warm their hands and share stories. Edmund told Makina about the best sledding hills in town, the places where seals could be spotted lounging on rocks, and the northern lights that painted the sky in winter. Makina shared tales of elephants walking past her old home, the sound of rainfall on tin roofs, and markets filled with colours and spices Edmund couldn't even imagine. As the short winter day began to fade, their snowman stood proud in the yard, slightly lopsided, but perfect in their eyes. They had given him Edmund's spare mittens and Makina's scarf, creating a symbol of their combined efforts that would last until the next warm day. "We should give him a name," Makina suggested, adjusting the carrot nose for the 10th time. "How about Zawadi?" Edmund struggled slightly with the pronunciation. "You said that means gift in Swahili, right?" Makina's face lit up at his remembrance of the word she had taught him earlier. "Zawadi the snowman," she declared, doing a small curtsy to their creation. As the streetlights began to flicker on, casting long shadows across the snow, Edmund felt a sudden urgency to cement this newfound friendship. From his pocket, he pulled out a small wooden heart, a project he had been working on in his father's workshop. It wasn't perfect, the edges were rough, and the shape was slightly asymmetrical, but he had carved it himself. "Here," he said, pressing it into Makina's gloved hand. "My dad says that when you give someone your heart, it means you'll be friends forever." Makina studied the heart with serious consideration before reaching into her coat pocket and pulling out a small carved wooden elephant, its trunk raised in greeting. "In Kenya, we believe elephants bring good luck and wisdom. I brought it from home, but I want you to have it." They exchanged their treasures as their mothers called them in for dinner, neither knowing that these small tokens would become tangible reminders of this day for years to come. As they parted ways, Edmund turned back one last time. "See you tomorrow?" he asked, hope making his voice rise slightly. "Tomorrow and every day," Makina replied with the certainty that only a child can possess. That night, as Edmund lay in bed listening to the wind whistle through the spruce trees outside his window, he held the wooden elephant and made a silent promise to himself. One day, when they were grown up, he would marry Makina Rosa. It didn't matter that some of the adults in town might stare or that his older brother might tease him. In his heart, with the pure conviction of childhood, he knew she was special. Across the street, Makina placed the wooden heart on her new windowsill, where the moonlight made the grain of the wood glow softly. She thought about how different Sitka was from her home in Kenya, how the cold air burned her lungs when she breathed deeply, and how she had been afraid she would never find a friend here. But then there was Edmund, with his kind eyes and ready smile, making her feel like she belonged. The next morning established a pattern that would continue for years to come. Edmund waited at the corner of Baranoff Street, bouncing on his toes to stay warm, until he saw Makina emerge from her house. Together they walked to Sitka Elementary School, their boot prints leaving parallel tracks in the fresh snow. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Spring arrived, melting their snowman but strengthening their friendship. They learned each other's languages, Edmund practicing Swahili phrases, while Makena picked up Norwegian words from Edmund's grandmother. They shared lunches, trading Edmund's smoked salmon sandwiches for Makena's chapati and bean stew. Their friendship became a topic of conversation in the small town, but not always in the way their parents hoped. Some adults would whisper when they saw them playing together, their words carrying undertones of prejudice that the children were still too young to fully understand. But Edmund and Makena remained blissfully unaware, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. One particularly memorable afternoon, as they sat on the swings at recess, Edmund noticed Makena was quieter than usual. A group of older girls had been whispering and pointing earlier, and although Makena had pretended not to notice, Edmund could tell it bothered her. "Want to know a secret?" he asked, pumping his legs to swing higher. Makena looked up, curiosity replacing the sadness in her eyes. "What kind of secret?" "When I grow up," Edmund declared, his voice carrying over the playground noise, "I'm going to marry you. Then we'll always be together, and nobody can say anything about it." Makena's laugh rang out, clear and true, as she matched his height on the swing. "Promise?" "Promise," Edmund replied solemnly, extending his pinky finger toward her on the next pass. They linked pinkies awkwardly between the swings, nearly falling off in the process, but the promise was made. It became their secret, something precious they held between them as they continued to navigate the complexities of growing up in a world that didn't always understand their friendship. That summer, Edmund taught Makena how to fish off the dock, while she taught him traditional Kenyan games that could be played with stones and string. They built elaborate sandcastles on the beach, decorated them with seashells, and pretended they were king and queen of their own kingdom, where everyone was welcome, regardless of how they looked. As the years passed, their childhood promise remained tucked away in their hearts, as precious as the wooden tokens they had exchanged on that first snowy day. The heart and the elephant became talismans of sorts, carried in pockets during important tests, held tight during thunderstorms, and serving as silent witnesses to the pure love that can exist in the hearts of children. Their elementary school teachers would often find them sitting together during lunch, heads bent close as they shared stories or helped each other with homework. Edmund excelled at mathematics and science, while Makena's gift for language and music made her a natural leader in their school's arts programs. By the time they reached their 10th birthday, their celebrations held jointly in the Moses' backyard with both families in attendance, their friendship had become something of a legend among their classmates. The other children had learned early on that teasing either Edmund or Makena meant dealing with both of them, and gradually the whispers and stares had faded into acceptance. That birthday party was when Edmund publicly renewed his promise, standing on a chair with a piece of cake in his hand and declaring to everyone present that one day he would marry Makena Rosa. The adults chuckled indulgently, seeing it as childhood fancy, but Makena's father noticed the serious look in Edmund's eyes and wondered if perhaps this young boy's heart knew something they didn't. As the chapter of their childhood began to draw to a close, with adolescence waiting just around the corner, Edmund and Makena's friendship continued to defy expectations and break down barriers in their small Alaskan town. They had created their own world within Sitka, one where love knew no boundaries and promises made in the snow were as binding as any legal document. Their story began with 2 children, a snowman, and exchanged wooden tokens. But it would grow into something far more significant, a testament to the power of pure hearts and unwavering friendship. The wooden heart and elephant, kept safe through the years, would become symbols of a love that started in childhood innocence, but was destined to weather the storms of life and emerge stronger. As this chapter of their lives drew to a close, neither Edmund nor Makena could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead, the separations and reunions, the heartbreak and healing. But in these precious early days, their love was as pure as the Alaskan snow that had witnessed their first meeting, untouched by the complexities of adulthood and strong in its simple certainty. The foundation laid in these childhood years would prove strong enough to withstand the tests of time, distance, and society's expectations. Their story had begun with a snowman named Zawadi, but it was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Chapter 2. Blossoming Love. The transition from childhood friendship to teenage romance happened as naturally as the changing of Sitka's seasons. At 15, Edmund and Makina's relationship began to shift, like the tide pulling back to reveal something deeper beneath the surface. The wooden heart and elephant they had exchanged years ago now resided in special boxes on their respective bedside tables, tangible reminders of promises made in childhood innocence. Sitka High School's halls buzzed with the energy of 300 students, but for Edmund and Makina, the crowded corridors might as well have been empty. Every morning, they met at their lockers, which through luck or divine intervention had been assigned just 3 apart. Edmund, now towering at 6 feet with his winter-white hair usually tousled from hockey practice, would lean against the metal doors, waiting for Makina to arrive. She had grown into her own kind of grace, her movements flowing like music, which made sense, given her dedication to both piano and choir. Her dark skin glowed with health and vitality, and she wore her hair in intricate braids that her mother wove each Sunday evening. The gap between her front teeth that had been so prominent in childhood had closed naturally, but her smile remained just as radiant. Their morning ritual included sharing their dreams from the night before, a tradition that had started in elementary school and carried through. Edmund's dreams were often about the sea, diving deep beneath the waves or discovering new marine species. Makina's dreams were filled with music, symphonies played by whales and seals, the northern lights dancing to celestial melodies. AP Chemistry became their sanctuary, the one class they shared that semester. They sat together at the black-topped lab table, their shoulders brushing as they conducted experiments. Edmund excelled at the mathematical aspects, while Makina had an intuitive understanding of molecular bonds. Together they were unbeatable, their lab reports receiving consistent A's. It was during one such chemistry class that Edmund first noticed how his heart rate increased when Makina leaned close to read their titration results. The scent of her coconut hair oil mixed with the sterile laboratory smell, creating an intoxicating combination that made it hard for him to focus. Their fingers brushed as she passed him the beaker, and the jolt of electricity that passed between them had nothing to do with static chemistry. The library became their refuge during lunch periods. Hidden among the towering shelves of books, they could escape the curious eyes and whispered comments that still followed them. While their friendship had long been accepted, the possibility of romance between them raised eyebrows in their small town. But in the library's quiet corners, surrounded by books of poetry and science, they created their own world. One rainy Tuesday, as they sat cross-legged between the stacks, sharing a thermos of hot chocolate, Edmund gathered his courage. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, a note he had spent hours writing and rewriting the night before. Without a word, he handed it to Makina, his hands trembling slightly. Makina unfolded the note carefully, her dark eyes scanning the words Edmund had penned in his neat handwriting. "Dear Makina, do you remember the promise I made on the swings when we were 7? About marrying you someday? I was just a kid then, but somehow I knew what my heart wanted. Now I'm older, and I understand more about what that promise means. What I feel for you isn't just friendship anymore. It's something deeper, something that makes my heart race when you're near and ache when you're away. I don't expect you to feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You're not just my best friend. You're the most beautiful person I've ever known, inside and out. Edmund." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Edmund studied the carpet pattern intently, afraid to meet her eyes. Then he felt her hand slip into his, their fingers intertwining naturally, like they had done this 1,000 times before. "I've been waiting for you to say something," Makina whispered, her voice carrying the melody it always did. "I was afraid our friendship was too precious to risk, but Edmund, I feel it too." Their first kiss happened right there, among the dusty tomes of marine biology and musical theory. It was brief and sweet, both of them too shy to linger, but it felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, they both laughed softly, years of tension dissolving in that quiet moment. The news of their relationship spread through Sitka High School like wildfire. Some students were surprised it hadn't happened sooner, while others muttered disapproving comments behind their backs. But Edmund and Makina had years of practice at ignoring negativity, their bond strengthened by every obstacle they had overcome together. Edmund's position as the star center on the hockey team and Makina's role as lead soprano in the school choir made them an unlikely power couple. They supported each other's passions unconditionally. Makina never missed a home game, her voice rising above the crowd as she cheered Edmund on, while Edmund sat in the front row of every choir performance, beaming with pride as Makina's voice soared through the chapel. Their different interests only served to enrich their relationship. After hockey practice, Edmund would join Makina in the music room, doing his homework while she practiced piano. The sound of scales and arpeggios became the soundtrack to his biology readings. Sometimes he would look up from his textbooks to watch her play, marveling at how her fingers danced across the keys, creating magic from mere wood and wire. During weekends, Makina would accompany Edmund on his marine biology expeditions along the coast. They would spend hours exploring tide pools, Edmund explaining the complex ecosystems, while Makina composed melodies inspired by the rhythm of the waves. She learned to identify different species of starfish and anemones, while he learned to appreciate the musical qualities in nature, the percussion of raindrops, the symphony of wind through the trees. Their junior year brought new challenges as they began to think about college. Edmund's passion for marine biology made the University of Alaska, Anchorage, an obvious choice, while Makina's exceptional musical talent had caught the attention of prestigious conservatories across the country. The possibility of separation loomed on the horizon, but they chose to focus on the present, making every moment count. Winter formal became a milestone in their relationship. Edmund wore a classic black tuxedo with a bow tie that matched Makina's dress, a stunning creation in deep blue that her mother had helped her design. As they danced beneath the gymnasium's twinkling lights, other couples gradually stopped to watch them. They moved together with the natural rhythm of two people who knew each other's souls, their steps as synchronized as their heartbeats. During a slow dance, Edmund pressed his forehead against Makina's, breathing in the moment. "You know," he whispered, "that promise I made when we were kids, I still mean it. Someday, when we're ready, I'm going to marry you, Makina Rosa." Makina's response was to pull him closer, her head resting against his chest, where she could hear his heart beating. "I'm holding you to that, Edmund Moses," she murmured, her words meant for him alone. Their love story became legendary among their classmates, the way Edmund carried Makina's books between classes, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely enjoyed their walks together. The way Makina would leave small notes in Edmund's locker, usually containing music-related puns that made him laugh out loud in the hallway. The way they looked at each other, as if they were sharing a secret that nobody else could understand. Spring brought college acceptance letters and difficult conversations about the future. Edmund had been accepted to UAA's marine biology program with a hockey scholarship, while Makina received the news they had both anticipated and dreaded: a full scholarship to Juilliard. The distance between Alaska and New York seemed insurmountable. but their love had already weathered so many storms. On a clear evening in May, they sat on the hood of Edmund's car at their favorite overlook spot, watching the sun paint the harbor in shades of gold and pink. Makina held her Juilliard acceptance letter in one hand, while her other hand was firmly clasped in Edmund's. 4 years isn't so long, Edmund said, trying to convince himself as much as her, and there's video chat and holidays and summers. And we have this, Makina added, touching the wooden heart she now wore on a chain around her neck. Edmund smiled, feeling the elephant carving in his pocket. Their childhood tokens had become symbols of their enduring connection. As their senior year drew to a close, Edmund and Makina faced the future with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Their love had blossomed from the purest of friendships into something profound and unshakable. They had learned that love knows no boundaries, not of race, not of distance, not of time. The chapter of their teenage romance was ending, but their story was far from over. The foundation they had built, brick by brick, from childhood friendship to deep love, would be tested by the challenges ahead. But for now, in the golden light of their youth, they held on to each other and their promises, believing in the power of a love that had started with 2 children, a snowman, and carved wooden tokens exchanged in the Alaskan snow. Chapter 3. Against all odds. The morning Edmund and Makina said goodbye at Sitka's tiny airport was wrapped in a thick Alaskan fog, as if nature itself was trying to soften the edges of their separation. They stood near the security checkpoint, their hands intertwined, neither wanting to be the first to let go. The wooden heart around Makina's neck seemed to pulse with each beat of her racing heart, while Edmund clutched the elephant carving in his pocket like a lifeline. "Distance means nothing when your souls are tethered," Makina whispered, pressing her forehead against Edmund's chest one last time. Her acceptance letter to Juilliard had been both a dream come true and the beginning of their greatest challenge. The 3,000 miles between New York and Anchorage loomed before them like a vast ocean they would have to navigate. Edmund's fingers traced the curve of her cheek, memorizing every detail of her face. "We've faced everything together since we were 7 years old," he reminded her, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions in his glacier blue eyes. "This is just another chapter in our story." The morning flight to Seattle was calling its final boarding, and Makina's father waited patiently by the security line. With one final embrace that held years of memories and promises for the future, they parted. Edmund watched until she disappeared through the security gates, her traditional Kenyan wrap a bright splash of color against the airport's grey walls. Their first semester apart tested the boundaries of their connection in ways they hadn't anticipated. The time difference between New York and Alaska meant their schedules rarely aligned. Edmund's marine biology courses and hockey practice filled his days, while Makina's rigorous conservatory schedule often kept her in practice rooms until midnight. They learned to cherish the small moments, quick text messages between classes, late-night video calls where one of them would often fall asleep to the sound of the other's voice. Makina's first performance at Juilliard came in October. She had won a coveted solo spot in the fall showcase, an honor rarely bestowed on freshmen. The night before her performance, she sat in her practice room, her fingers hovering over the keys of a Steinway grand piano that cost more than her parents' house. The piece she would play was a complex composition that spoke of northern lights and Arctic winters, of first love and promised forevers. Unknown to her, Edmund had been planning for weeks. He had picked up extra shifts at the Marine Research Center, saved every penny, and arranged with his professors to make up missed classes. When Makina walked onto the stage the next evening, her heart nearly stopped as she spotted him in the third row, still wearing his travel clothes but beaming with pride. Her performance that night brought the audience to their feet, but she played for only one person. Every note carried their story. The snowman they built on their first day, the secret kisses in the library, the promises whispered under aurora-painted skies. When she took her final bow, tears glistened in her eyes as she found Edmund's gaze in the crowd. They spent precious hours together in New York, walking through Central Park, as Edmund marveled at the city's energy and McKenna showed him her new world. He told her about his research project on whale migration patterns, while she described the way music theory was opening new ways of understanding harmony and composition. Their different paths were broadening their horizons, but their hearts remained anchored to each other. The hardest moments came during holidays when they couldn't be together. Thanksgiving found McKenna performing at a prestigious concert series, while Edmund's hockey schedule kept him in Alaska for winter training. They sent each other care packages, Edmund's containing smoked salmon and recordings of whale songs from his research, McKenna's filled with street vendor pretzels and playbills from performances she wished they could have attended together. Their friends in their respective schools couldn't quite understand the depth of their commitment. Edmund's teammates would try to set him up with local girls, while McKenna's fellow musicians questioned why she wouldn't date any of the talented performers who clearly admired her. But Edmund and McKenna's love had been built on something stronger than proximity. It was founded on a friendship that had defied societal expectations from the very beginning. During spring break of their freshman year, they reunited in Sitka. The familiar streets held new meaning as they retraced the steps of their shared history. They visited their old high school, sneaked into the library for old time's sake, and stood on the beach where they had spent countless hours exploring tide pools and sharing dreams. One evening, as they sat on their favorite overlook point, watching the sunset paint the harbor in familiar golds and purples, McKenna played a piece she had composed for Edmund. Her portable keyboard couldn't match the grand pianos at Juilliard, but the melody carried all the longing, hope, and love that filled their separation. Edmund listened with closed eyes, hearing in the music everything they couldn't always find words to express. "I'm composing our story," she explained, her fingers still dancing over the keys. "Every piece I write has elements of you, of us, of this place where we found each other." Edmund pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her coconut hair oil mixed with the salt air of their hometown. "And every time I'm out on the water, studying the patterns of marine life, I'm learning more about how everything in nature is connected, just like us." Their sophomore year brought new challenges and triumphs. McKenna's talent caught the attention of prestigious music festivals in Europe, while Edmund's research on whale communication patterns earned him an internship with the leading marine biology institute. Their paths were taking them in different directions, but like the tide always returns to shore, they found ways to come back to each other. They developed rituals to bridge the distance. Every Sunday night, no matter where they were or what time zone they were in, they would video call and share a meal together. Edmund would cook the salmon dishes his grandmother had taught him, while McKenna prepared traditional Kenyan recipes her mother had passed down. They would prop up their phones and pretend they were sitting across from each other, sharing stories about their weekend dreams for their future. Their junior year tested them further. McKenna was selected for a prestigious exchange program with the Moscow Conservatory, adding even more miles and time zones to their separation. Edmund's research took him on extended voyages into the Gulf of Alaska, where satellite reception was spotty at best, yet they persevered, writing long emails that became like love letters, sharing the details of their days and the depths of their hearts. During one particularly difficult period, when they hadn't been able to talk for nearly 2 weeks due to Edmund's research voyage, McKenna sat at her piano in Moscow late one night. The winter wind howled outside her window, reminding her of Alaskan storms. She began to play, pouring all her longing into the keys, and recorded the improvised piece. When Edmund finally returned to port and received the audio file, he played it on repeat in his lab, feeling closer to her through the music than any words could have managed. Their love story became known at both their schools, the Alaskan marine biologist and the Kenyan-American pianist, who were proving that distance couldn't diminish true connection. Their dedication to each other inspired their friends, though few understood the depth of history that made their bond unbreakable. As their senior year approached, they faced decisions about graduate studies and career paths. McKenna had opportunities with prestigious orchestras in Europe and Asia, while Edmund's research was drawing attention from marine institutes around the Pacific Rim. The future held no guarantees of making the distance between them any shorter. Yet through it all, they held on to the promise they had made as children, reinforced as teenagers and strengthened through their college years. The wooden heart and elephant remained their tangible connections to each other. McKenna never performed without her necklace, and Edmund kept the elephant carving in a waterproof case during his research dives. Their love had matured like a fine wine, deepened by time and distance rather than diminished by it. They had learned that love wasn't just about being together physically. It was about supporting each other's dreams, celebrating each other's successes from afar, and maintaining a connection that transcended physical distance. The chapter of their college years was drawing to a close, but their story was entering a new phase. They had proved to themselves and the world that their love could survive the challenges of distance and time. As they approached graduation, they faced new decisions and challenges, but they faced them together, their hearts still beating in sync despite the miles between them. In the end, their college years had taught them that love, when real and pure, knows no boundaries. Like the northern lights that had witnessed their childhood promises, their connection danced across continents, beautiful and ethereal, yet anchored in something deeper than the ocean Edmund studied, and more lasting than the music McKenna created. They had bet against the odds, and love had won. Chapter 4. The Return. Spring painted Sitka in gentle watercolors when Edmund and McKenna both returned home after graduation. The town hadn't changed much in 4 years. The same Victorian houses lined the streets, the same fishing boats bobbed in the harbor, and the mountains still stood sentinel over the sea. But they had changed, grown into themselves while somehow growing even closer despite the distance. Edmund arrived first, his research equipment and marine biology degrees in tow. He had accepted a position at the Sitka Sound Science Center, the same facility where McKenna's father had worked all those years ago. His first morning back, he walked to their old meeting spot at the corner of Baranoff Street, muscle memory guiding his feet. The morning fog wrapped around him like a familiar embrace as he waited, just as he had done countless times before. When McKenna's taxi turned onto their street 3 days later, Edmund was there waiting. She stepped out, her elegant conservatory poise softening into something more natural as their eyes met. The years apart hadn't diminished their connection. If anything, the distance had crystallized their love into something rare and precious, like a diamond formed under pressure. "Welcome home," Edmund whispered as they came together, his arms wrapping around her waist as her hands found their place on his shoulders. The wooden heart still hung around her neck, and he could feel the elephant carving in his pocket pressing between them. They stood there for a long moment, their heartbeats sinking as naturally as they always had. Their reunion brought a new energy to Sitka. The town had followed their story over the years, the local boy who studied whale songs and the pianist who had performed in concert halls around the world. Their love story had become something of a legend, proof that sometimes childhood promises could weather any storm. McKenna had brought her music back with her, accepting a position as the music director at their old high school while also teaching private piano lessons. Her students quickly discovered that her teaching style incorporated stories of marine life and nature, inspired by her years of loving a marine biologist. She would explain rhythm using the patterns of whale songs Edmund had recorded, and describe harmony through the metaphor of ecosystem balance. Edmund's work at the Science Centre flourished as he combined his research expertise with his natural talent for education. He led tours for school groups, his enthusiasm infectious as he shared the wonders of marine life with wide-eyed children. Sometimes McKenna would join these tours, and together they would demonstrate the connection between science and music, showing how whale songs could be translated into musical notation. Their shared apartment overlooked the harbour, small but filled with the things that made it uniquely theirs. Edmund's marine specimens carefully displayed alongside McKenna's musical scores, photographs of their time apart mingled with childhood memories. The walls held their story. Playbills from McKenna's performances around the world, scientific papers Edmund had published, and at the centre a framed photograph of their first snowman, Zawadi. One evening, as they sat on their small balcony watching the sun paint the water in shades of gold and purple, Edmund reached for McKenna's hand. The ring he had carried in his pocket for weeks felt warm against his palm, a band of white gold set with tiny diamonds that reminded him of stars reflecting on the ocean. "Do you remember the promise I made when we were 7? He asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "The one I renewed at 15 and again when we were 18? McKenna turned to him, her dark eyes shining with understanding. The setting sun caught the wooden heart around her neck, making it glow like amber. "You said you would marry me someday," she replied softly. Edmund slid from his chair to one knee, still holding her hand. "I've spent my life studying the patterns of nature, how everything is connected, how some forces are as reliable as the tides, but nothing in all my research is as constant as my love for you. McKenna Rosa, will you marry me?" Her yes was barely a whisper, but it carried all the power of a symphony. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she pulled him close for a kiss that tasted of happy tears and fulfilled promises. Their engagement announcement spread through Sitka like wildfire, bringing joy to those who had watched their love story unfold from the beginning. Their families came together to plan a wedding that would honor both their cultures, a celebration of not just their love, but the bridging of worlds that their relationship had always represented. The wedding preparations became a town-wide affair. Edmund's mother worked with McKenna's to blend Norwegian and Kenyan traditions. The local fishermen offered their best catches for the feast, while McKenna's students planned a special musical performance. Even the weather seemed to cooperate, with the forecast promising clear skies and a chance of aurora borealis, nature's own wedding lights. They chose to hold the ceremony at sunset on the beach, where they had spent countless hours exploring tide pools and sharing dreams. Wooden benches were arranged in a semicircle, facing the water where the sun would paint the sky in wedding colors. McKenna's father built an arch from driftwood, which local children helped decorate with native Alaskan flowers and traditional Kenyan fabrics. The day of the wedding dawned clear and crisp. As McKenna prepared in her childhood home, her mother wove tiny white flowers into her braids, just as her grandmother had done for her own wedding in Kenya. Her dress was a masterpiece of cultural fusion, white silk flowing like ocean waves, with traditional Kenyan beadwork catching the light like sea spray. Edmund stood under the driftwood arch, wearing a suit that matched the deep blue of the Alaskan sea. In his pocket he carried the wooden elephant that had been his constant companion for so many years. His hands trembled slightly as he watched the guests arrive, his hockey teammates from college seated next to McKenna's musician friends, their high school teachers wiping away tears, and what seemed like half of Sitka filling the beach. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, music filled the air. Not the traditional wedding march, but an original composition McKenna had written for the occasion. played by her most talented students. The melody carried hints of Norwegian folk songs and Kenyan rhythms woven together as seamlessly as their lives had become. Makena appeared at the top of the beach path, her father beside her. The setting sun wrapped her in a golden glow as she walked toward Edmund, her smile as radiant as it had been on the day they first met. The wooden heart around her neck caught the light, a reminder of where their story began. Their vows were a mixture of traditional promises and personal memories. Edmund spoke of a love that had grown from childhood friendship into something as vast as the ocean he studied. Makena's words flowed like music, speaking of harmony found in difference and strength found in distance overcome. They exchanged rings under the deepening sky, just as the first stars began to appear. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the northern lights appeared, ribbons of green and purple dancing across the darkening sky, as if nature itself was celebrating their union. Their guests gasped in wonder, but Edmund and Makena were lost in their own world, where promises made in childhood had bloomed into a love story for the ages. The reception was held in the high school gymnasium, transformed by hundreds of twinkling lights into a magical space that blended their two worlds. Tables were decorated with centerpieces that featured both Arctic flowers and African violets. The feast included Norwegian salmon alongside Kenyan dishes Makena's mother had spent days preparing. Music and laughter filled the air as their two families came together in celebration. Edmund's grandmother taught Makena's younger cousins traditional Norwegian dances, while Makena's uncles shared stories of her childhood in Kenya. Cultural differences melted away in the warmth of shared joy and mutual respect. Their first dance was to a piece Makena had composed, performed live by her musician friends from Juilliard, who had flown in for the wedding. The melody spoke of their journey, the sweet notes of childhood friendship, the deep chords of separation overcome, and the soaring harmony of love triumphant. As they moved across the dance floor, Edmund held Makena close, remembering their first dance at the winter formal years ago. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" he asked softly. "About holding me to my promise?" Makena laughed, the sound as musical as ever. "And you kept it, just like you've kept every promise you've ever made to me." The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually Edmund and Makena slipped away to their special overlook point. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the aurora borealis paint the sky in celebration colors, their hands intertwined and their hearts beating in perfect synchronization. This chapter of their story had reached its beautiful conclusion, but it was really just the beginning. Their love, born in childhood innocence and tested by time and distance, had emerged stronger and deeper. Like the tide pools they had explored as children, their relationship contained endless depths to discover, endless wonders to share. As they drove away from their reception, tin cans rattling behind their car and "just married" written on the windows, they carried with them not just the symbols of their past, the wooden heart and elephant, but the promise of their future. Their story had proved that love, when pure and true, could bridge any distance and overcome any obstacle. The town of Sitka had witnessed their love story from its very beginning. From two children building a snowman to two adults pledging their lives to each other. And as they began their new life together, they knew that, like the mountains standing guard over their hometown, their love would remain constant and true, a beacon of hope for all who witnessed it. Chapter 5. Early Marriage Bliss. The first year of Edmund and Makena's marriage unfolded like a symphony, each day adding new notes to their harmony. Their small cottage overlooking Sitka Sound became a sanctuary where their two worlds continued to blend and grow. The morning light would stream through the windows, catching the crystal prisms Makena had hung, a wedding gift from her students, sending rainbows dancing across the walls as Edmund prepared their morning coffee. Their daily routines took on a comfortable rhythm. Edmund would wake early, drawn by the call of the sea, and his research at the Science Centre. Before leaving, he would place a fresh cup of coffee on the piano, where he knew Makina would find it when she woke to practice. The wooden heart still hung around her neck, and the elephant carving had found a permanent home on a small shelf above their bed, watching over their dreams. Makina's music filled their home, her compositions evolving to include the sounds of their shared life. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore beneath their cottage window became recurring motifs in her pieces. She would often practice while Edmund worked at his desk nearby, her music providing a soundtrack to his marine biology research. Sometimes he would look up from his papers to watch her play, still amazed by the way her fingers could create such magic from ivory and wood. Their cottage slowly transformed into a reflection of their united lives. Edmund's scientific journals shared shelf space with Makina's sheet music. Her Kenyan tapestries hung alongside his Norwegian family photos. The walls of their living room displayed both her concert programs and his published research papers. A large aquarium housed specimens from Edmund's research, its gentle bubbling providing a bass note to Makina's piano melodies. Their professional lives flourished in tandem. Edmund's work on whale communication patterns gained recognition in the scientific community, leading to speaking engagements at marine biology conferences. Makina's reputation as a music teacher grew, with students traveling from neighboring towns for her lessons. She had a gift for connecting with young musicians, using Edmund's marine biology knowledge to help them understand rhythm and harmony through nature's patterns. One stormy evening, as rain pelted their windows and wind howled through the spruce trees, they sat together on their worn leather couch, sharing stories from their day. Edmund had discovered a new pattern in the songs of humpback whales, while Makina had helped a struggling student finally master a difficult piece by comparing the music's flow to ocean currents. "It's amazing," Edmund mused, his arm wrapped around Makina's shoulders, "how everything in our lives seems to weave together. Your music, my science, they're just different languages describing the same beautiful world." Makina leaned into him, her fingers absently playing piano notes on his knee. "Remember when we were kids, and you used to tell me about the tide pools while I hummed songs about the creatures we found? We were already learning each other's languages back then." Their weekends became adventures of discovery. They would pack picnic lunches and explore the coastline, Edmund sharing his knowledge of marine ecosystems, while Makina composed melodies inspired by their findings. She would bring her portable keyboard to the beach, creating music that captured the rhythm of waves and the calls of seabirds, while Edmund documented the behavior of intertidal creatures. Their different cultural backgrounds continued to enrich their marriage. Sunday dinners became a celebration of their heritage, with Edmund learning to cook traditional Kenyan dishes while teaching Makina his grandmother's Norwegian recipes, their kitchen filled with the aromas of cardamom and curry, salmon and sukuma wiki, their meals becoming a tangible representation of their united lives. During the long Alaskan summer days, they would sit on their small balcony until midnight, watching the sun paint the sky in endless twilight. Edmund would share his dreams of establishing a marine research foundation, while Makina spoke of creating a music program that would bring classical training to underprivileged children. They supported each other's ambitions unconditionally, each success shared, each challenge faced together. Their love became a beacon in Sitka, inspiring others with its depth and authenticity. Local teenagers would sometimes sit on the beach below their cottage, listening to Makina's piano mixing with the sound of waves, while watching Edmund work in his small research boat offshore. Their story had become part of the town's fabric, a modern fairy tale of love transcending boundaries. The changing seasons brought new experiences to share. In autumn, they hosted their first Thanksgiving dinner, combining American tradition with Kenyan harvest celebrations and Norwegian customs. Their cottage overflowed with friends and family, the air filled with multiple languages and laughter. Makina played piano while Edmund's mother taught her Kenyan cousins Norwegian folk dances, the evening becoming a testament to the beauty of cultural fusion. Winter brought the northern lights and cozy evenings spent planning their future. They would sit by their fireplace, Edmund reading scientific papers while Makina composed, occasionally sharing thoughts that would spark long, deep conversations about life, love, and their dreams for the future. The wooden hart and elephant watched over these moments, silent witnesses to their continuing story. Their first Christmas as a married couple became a celebration of traditions old and new. They decorated their cottage with both Norwegian Christmas ornaments and Kenyan crafts, creating a unique holiday atmosphere that represented their united lives. On Christmas Eve, Makina performed a special concert at the local church, playing arrangements that blended carols from both their cultures, while Edmund beamed with pride from the front row. As spring approached, they began discussing the possibility of starting a family. These conversations would happen in quiet moments, while walking along the beach at sunset, or lying in bed, listening to the rain on their roof. They talked about how they would share both their cultures with their children, teaching them to appreciate the diversity that had made their own love so rich and unique. Their first wedding anniversary arrived with the return of spring, marked by a private celebration that echoed their wedding day. Edmund surprised Makina by arranging for her favorite students to perform a piece he had secretly commissioned, a composition that incorporated recordings of whale songs with traditional music from both their cultures. Makina moved him to tears with her gift, a series of compositions inspired by their first year of marriage, each piece telling a story of their shared life. Throughout that first year, they faced challenges with the same unity that had characterized their relationship since childhood. When Edmund's research required longer days at sea, Makina would pack him lunches with encouraging notes hidden inside. When Makina struggled with a particularly difficult composition, Edmund would sit with her at the piano, offering support even though he couldn't read music. Their home became a gathering place for friends and colleagues, hosting dinner parties where marine biologists engaged in passionate discussions with musicians, each group learning from the other. These evenings often ended with Makina at the piano, playing while Edmund shared stories of his latest research, their different worlds harmonizing perfectly. They learned to dance through life's minor disappointments together. When Edmund's research grant application was initially rejected, Makina helped him revise and strengthen his proposal. When several of Makina's advanced students moved away for college, Edmund helped her reorganize her teaching schedule to accommodate new beginners. Each challenge was met with united strength and unwavering support. Their love continued to grow in unexpected ways. Edmund found himself humming Makina's compositions while out on his research vessel, while she began incorporating scientific terminology into her music lessons. Their individual passions didn't compete but complemented each other, creating a richer, more vibrant life together. As their first year of marriage drew to a close, their cottage had become more than just a home. It was a testament to the power of love, to bridge differences and create something beautiful and new. The sound of Makina's piano mingling with the sea breeze, the sight of Edmund's research papers scattered among sheet music, the blend of aromas from their fusion cooking, all of it spoke to the unique harmony they had created together. Yet beneath the surface of their marital bliss, subtle currents were beginning to stir. The demands of their growing careers would soon test the strength of their bond in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, in the golden light of their first year together, their love seemed as eternal as the tides and as unshakable as the Alaskan mountains that watched over their home. The wooden heart and elephant remained their touchstones, reminders of the pure love that had brought them together as children and sustained them through years of separation. These symbols of their beginning would soon become anchors in the storms ahead, but in this chapter of their story, they were simply beautiful reminders of a promise fulfilled. Chapter 6. The Fracture. The pressure began with small cracks, hardly noticeable against the backdrop of their otherwise harmonious life. Like hairline fractures in sea ice, these tiny fissures seemed insignificant at first, easily dismissed, readily overlooked. But beneath the surface, forces were at work that would test the foundations of Edmund and Makina's love in ways they never expected. The changes came gradually, carried in on the tide of their growing professional success. Edmund's groundbreaking research on whale communication patterns had caught the attention of major marine biology institutes across the Pacific Rim. His work was increasingly cited in prestigious journals, leading to invitations for extended research expeditions. Each opportunity seemed too important to decline, each project promising to advance their understanding of marine ecosystems in crucial ways. Meanwhile, Makina's reputation as both a performer and teacher had grown beyond their small Alaskan town. Her unique approach to music education, blending classical training with natural rhythms and multicultural influences, attracted attention from prestigious conservatories. Concert halls in Seattle, Vancouver, and San Francisco began reaching out with performance opportunities. Her students were winning competitions, their success reflecting back on her growing influence in the classical music world. Their cottage overlooking Sitka Sound, once a sanctuary of their shared life, began to feel the strain of their diverging paths. The piano that had filled their home with music stood silent more often as Makina traveled for performances. Edmund's research papers piled up on his desk, many half-finished as longer expeditions kept him away from his home office. One particularly telling morning, Edmund found himself staring at their shared calendar, now marked with more days apart than together. His finger traced the upcoming months. His 3-week research voyage to study whale migration patterns would overlap with Makina's concert series in Portland. They would miss their monthly dinner with her parents, another small tradition slipping through the cracks of their busy lives. The wooden heart around Makina's neck and the elephant carving on their bedroom shelf seemed to watch with silent concern as their once synchronized rhythms began to falter. Simple routines that had grounded their marriage started to fray. Edmund no longer had time to leave coffee by the piano before dawn. Makina's practice sessions no longer provided a soundtrack to his research. Their first serious tension surfaced during a rare shared breakfast. Edmund was reviewing the proposal for an extended research project that would take him to the Aleutian Islands for 6 months. The project promised to be career-defining, focusing on the impact of climate change on whale migration patterns. He looked up from his papers to find Makina watching him, her dark eyes holding a mixture of pride and pain. 6 months is a long time, she said softly, her fingers absently playing piano notes on the kitchen table, a habit that usually made Edmund smile, but now seemed to emphasize the distance growing between them. "It's an incredible opportunity," Edmund replied, his voice carrying an edge of defensiveness. "This research could help protect entire marine ecosystems. We've handled distance before, remember? During college?" "College was different," Makina countered, her normally melodic voice tight with emotion. "We were working toward being together. Now it feels like we're working toward separate lives." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. They had promised to support each other's dreams, but neither had anticipated how those dreams might pull them in opposite directions. The wooden heart seemed to weigh heavier around Makina's neck, a reminder of simpler times when their promises had seemed easier to keep. Their attempts to bridge the growing gap often fell short. Video calls dropped in remote research locations, Planned visits were cancelled due to unexpected performance opportunities or research emergencies. The spontaneous joy that had characterized their early marriage began to feel choreographed, scheduled, and sometimes forced. Even their shared passions began to feel the strain. When Edmund tried to tell Makina about a breakthrough in his research, her attention seemed divided, her mind clearly on upcoming performances. When she attempted to share new compositions with him, his responses felt perfunctory, distracted by data analyses that needed his attention. Their home began to reflect their diverging paths. Edmund's side of the office accumulated scientific journals and marine biology specimens, while Makina's piano disappeared under sheets of music and competition programs. The space between their two worlds, once bridged so naturally by their love, began to feel like an unbridgeable chasm. The breaking point approached gradually, like a storm building on the horizon. Makina had been offered a position as artist-in-residence at a prestigious conservatory in Seattle. The opportunity would allow her to influence young musicians on a larger scale, to share her unique approach to music education with a wider audience. But it would mean leaving Sitka, leaving the home they had built together. She broke the news to Edmund one evening as they sat on their balcony, watching the sun paint the harbor in shades of gold and purple. The scene was reminiscent of countless romantic moments they had shared in that spot, making the conversation that followed even more painful. "I turned it down," Makina said quietly, her fingers twisting the wooden heart pendant. "I couldn't imagine leaving our home, our life here." Edmund's reaction surprised them both. Instead of relief or gratitude, he felt a surge of frustration. "You shouldn't have done that without discussing it with me," he said, his voice sharper than intended. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity you've been working toward." "I thought you'd be happy," Makina responded, hurt evident in her tone. "You're the one who's always talking about the importance of our life here, of your research in these waters." "My research isn't tied to Sitka forever," Edmund countered. "The ocean is vast, and there are other research centers. I don't want you sacrificing your dreams for a life that's too small." The words hung between them like frost in the air. Makina stood slowly, her grace now serving to emphasize the distance between them. "And you're sacrificing us for a life that's too vast," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks as she walked inside. That night, they slept on opposite sides of their bed, the space between them feeling wider than any ocean Edmund had ever studied. The wooden hart and elephant watched from their perches, silent witnesses to the fracturing of a love that had once seemed unbreakable. The following days brought a painful dance of avoidance and attempted reconciliation. They still shared their home, still went through the motions of their married life, but the music had gone out of their movements. Edmund threw himself into preparations for his upcoming research expedition, while Makina spent longer hours at the school, her music taking on a melancholy tone that her students noticed but didn't understand. Their friends and family began to sense the tension. Dinner invitations were declined more frequently. Their usual joint appearances at community events became solo ventures. The town that had celebrated their love story now watched with concern as the fairy tale showed signs of strain. The wooden heart around Makina's neck felt heavier with each passing day, while Edmund found himself holding the elephant carving more often, running his fingers over its worn surface, as if seeking answers in its familiar contours. These childhood tokens, once symbols of their unshakable bond, now seemed to mock the distance growing between them. Their last attempt at connection came during a rare shared evening at home. Makina sat at her piano, playing a piece she had composed during their courtship. Edmund stood by the window, watching the northern lights dance across the sky. The melody carried all the love and hope that had defined their relationship. but now it felt like a requiem for what they were losing. "I remember when you used to sit beside me while I practiced," Makina said softly, her fingers still moving over the keys. "You'd read your research papers, but you always seemed to be listening." "And you used to come out on the research vessel with me," Edmund replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You'd bring your keyboard and compose while I collected data. We made it work then. What changed?" The question lingered unanswered as the aurora borealis painted the sky outside their window. They had both changed, grown in different directions, while trying to hold on to what they had built together. The pressure of their individual dreams had created fissures in their foundation, and neither knew how to repair the damage without sacrificing pieces of themselves. The final crack appeared during a discussion about Edmund's upcoming research expedition. Makina had received another invitation to perform, this time with a prestigious orchestra in New York. The dates overlapped with Edmund's planned return, meaning they would spend another milestone apart. "Maybe this is a sign," Makina said quietly, looking at the calendar where their separate commitments filled every available space. "Maybe we need to stop pretending we can have it all." Edmund felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. They had promised to support each other's dreams, but somewhere along the way, those dreams had become competitors rather than companions. The life they had built together was crumbling under the pressure of their individual ambitions. That night, as a storm raged outside their cottage, matching the turmoil in their hearts, they faced the reality of their situation. The love that had survived childhood, distance, and societal pressure was now threatening to buckle under the weight of their own success. Makina packed a small bag, the wooden heart still around her neck. Edmund watched from their bedroom doorway, the elephant carving clutched in his hand. Neither spoke of separation or divorce. Those words seemed too final, too harsh for what they were feeling. Instead, they called it a break, a pause, a chance to rediscover themselves individually. As Makina prepared to leave for her New York performance early, planning to stay with friends afterward, she turned to Edmund one last time. The look they shared held years of memories, building snowmen, sharing secret kisses in the library, dancing at their wedding. Their love hadn't died. It had simply been buried under the weight of their separate dreams. "Distance means nothing when your souls are tethered," Edmund whispered, echoing words they had spoken so many times before. But this time, the distance they faced wasn't measured in miles but in the space between the people they had become. Makina's response was a soft, sad smile as she touched the wooden heart at her neck. "Sometimes love isn't enough," she said quietly. "Sometimes it needs space to remember why it began." As she walked out into the Alaskan night, the door closing behind her felt like the final note of a symphony they had composed together. Edmund stood at the window, watching her taxi disappear into the darkness, the elephant carving warm in his palm from being held so tightly. The fracture that had started as tiny cracks had finally split wide open, leaving them both standing on opposite sides of a chasm neither knew how to cross. Their love story, which had seemed destined for a fairy tale ending, now faced its greatest test. The question that remained, hanging in the silence of their separate spaces, was whether the love that had brought them together as children would be strong enough to survive the adults they had become. As the storm continued to rage outside, Edmund placed the elephant carving next to a framed photo of their wedding day. Somewhere in New York, Makina's hand would be touching the wooden heart, both of them holding on to pieces of a love that had once seemed unbreakable. The chapter of their unity had ended, but their story wasn't over. It was simply entering its darkest night before what they hoped would eventually be dawn. Chapter 7. The Breaking Point. October in Sitka brought storms that mirrored the turbulence in Edmund and Makina's hearts. The wind howled through the spruce trees, waves crashed against the shore beneath their cottage, and rain pelted the windows with a fury that matched their unspoken emotions. It was during one such storm that their world finally shattered completely. The day had begun, like many others in recent months, with silence. Edmund sat at his research desk, surrounded by papers detailing his upcoming 6-month expedition to the Aleutian Islands. The project promised to be groundbreaking, combining his expertise in whale communication with cutting-edge climate change research. His name would be listed as lead researcher, a career-defining moment that should have brought pure joy. McKenna stood at her piano, fingers hovering over the keys without playing. The letter from the New York Philharmonic lay open on the music stand, an invitation to be their featured soloist for an entire season. It was the kind of opportunity musicians dreamed about, a chance to perform on one of the world's most prestigious stages. Yet the thought of accepting filled her with a complex mixture of excitement and dread. The wooden heart felt heavy around her neck as she finally broke the silence. "I received another invitation today," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the storm outside. "The Philharmonic wants me for their next season. A full year in New York." Edmund looked up from his papers, his glacier blue eyes meeting her dark ones across the room that suddenly felt too small to contain their separate dreams. That's incredible, McKenna. You deserve it. Your talent belongs on stages like that." "Don't," McKenna replied, her voice catching. "Don't pretend this is simple. Don't act like this decision doesn't affect both of us." The tension that had been building for months crackled between them like lightning in the Alaskan sky. Edmund stood, running his hand through his platinum hair in frustration. "What do you want me to say? That you should turn it down? Stay here in Sitka while I'm gone for months at a time anyway? I want you to acknowledge that we're falling apart." McKenna's voice rose with emotion, her hands pressing against the piano keys and creating a discordant chord that hung in the air. "Every decision we make takes us further apart, and we're both pretending it's not happening." Edmund moved to the window, watching the storm rage across the harbor. The elephant carving sat heavy in his pocket, a reminder of simpler times. "We knew this could happen. We're both passionate about our work. We've always supported each other's dreams." "Supporting each other's dreams shouldn't mean losing each other in the process," McKenna countered, moving away from the piano to stand behind him. "Remember when we used to find ways to combine our worlds? When your research inspired my music, when my rhythms helped you understand whale songs?" "We were younger then," Edmund replied, his voice tight with emotion. "The stakes were lower. Now we're both on the verge of something bigger than ourselves. Your music could touch thousands of lives. My research could help save entire species." McKenna touched the wooden heart at her neck, feeling its familiar contours. "And what about us? What about the life we built here? The promises we made?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the storm outside. Edmund turned to face her, and for a moment they were children again, building a snowman, exchanging wooden tokens, making promises they believed would last forever. "I can't ask you to give up New York," Edmund finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just like you can't ask me to abandon my research. We're both too stubborn, too dedicated to our paths." "So what are you saying?" McKenna's question hung in the air between them, though they both knew the answer. "I'm saying that maybe we need to admit that love isn't always enough. That sometimes following your dreams means letting go of other dreams along the way." The words fell between them like shards of ice, sharp and cold. McKenna stepped back, her hand clutching the wooden heart as if it could shield her from the pain of this moment. "You're choosing your research over us." "No," Edmund's response was immediate, passionate. "I'm choosing to not be the reason you turned down the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm choosing to not resent you for asking me to stay when my work takes me away. I'm choosing to let you fly, even if it means watching you soar away from me." Tears froze on McKenna's cheeks as she processed his words. The storm outside had reached its peak, the wind howling like a wounded animal. And what about all our plans, our dreams of starting a family, the life we built here? Edmund moved toward her, his hand reaching out but stopping short of touching her. Dreams change, Makina. We've both changed. The kids who exchanged wooden tokens and made forever promises. Maybe we've grown into different people than they thought we'd be. The truth of his words hit them both with devastating force. They had grown, evolved, developed into successful professionals in their respective fields. But somewhere along the way, they had grown in different directions, like two trees reaching for different patches of sky. "I can't do this anymore," Makina whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending we're not slowly destroying each other. Every time you leave for research, every time I travel for performances, we're both holding back, both feeling guilty for pursuing our passions. And that guilt is poisoning everything we built," Edmund finished her thought, understanding flowing between them one last time. "We're both sacrificing pieces of ourselves, trying to hold on to something that's slipping away." The decision, when it finally came, felt both sudden and inevitable. Makina would accept the New York position. Edmund would proceed with his research expedition. Their paths, which had been intertwined since childhood, would finally diverge. As Makina packed her essential belongings, the storm began to subside, as if nature itself had exhausted its fury. The wooden heart still hung around her neck, and Edmund's elephant carving remained in his pocket. Symbols of a love that had been pure and true, even if it couldn't survive the realities of their adult lives. Before leaving, Makina sat at the piano one last time. Her fingers found the keys without thought, playing the melody she had composed for their wedding. Edmund stood in the doorway, listening to the notes that carried all their hopes, dreams, and now their goodbyes. "I'll always love you," Makina said softly as the final notes faded. "The girl who gave you her heart in the snow will always love the boy who promised to marry her someday." Edmund's voice was rough with emotion when he replied, "And I'll always love you." No matter where our paths lead, no matter how far apart we go, a piece of my heart will always belong to the girl who taught me that music and science could dance together. As Makina walked through their front door for the last time, the wooden heart seemed to pulse against her skin, while the elephant carving in Edmund's pocket felt heavier than ever. They didn't say goodbye. That word felt too final, too complete for what they were feeling. Instead, they shared one last look that held all their history: snowball fights and secret kisses, quiet evenings and grand celebrations, promises made and now broken. In that look was also understanding, forgiveness, and a love that would never truly die, even if it could no longer light their way forward together. The taxi arrived, its headlights cutting through the post-storm mist. As Makina stepped into the car, Edmund remained on their cottage porch, watching until the taillights disappeared into the Alaskan night. The northern lights began to dance across the sky, nature's own farewell symphony for a love story that had seemed written in the stars. In the days that followed, their separate lives began to take shape. Edmund threw himself into preparations for his research expedition, while news of Makina's acceptance of the New York position spread through their small town. Their friends and family mourned the end of what had seemed a fairy tale romance, but those closest to them understood that sometimes love means letting go. Their cottage stood empty, a silent testament to the life they had built and lost. The piano remained untouched. Edmund's research papers lay filed away, and the photographs of their happiness still hung on the walls. It would be years before either of them could bring themselves to decide what to do with these physical remnants of their shared dreams. As October faded into November, Edmund and Makina began their separate journeys. She threw herself into preparations for her New York debut, while he focused on his upcoming expedition. They didn't communicate directly, but through mutual friends, they learned of each other's successes and struggles. Their breaking point had come not from a lack of love, but from an abundance of passion for their work, for their dreams, for the people they were becoming. The wooden heart and elephant carving remained their connections to what had been, tokens of a love that had shaped them both into the people they needed to become, even if those people could no longer walk the same path. The chapter of their unity had ended, but their story wasn't over. Like the tide pulling back from the shore, their separation felt like both an ending and a beginning. The question was, beginning of what? Only time would tell if the love that had brought them together as children would find a way to bridge the gap between the adults they had become. Chapter 8. Years of Silence. 10 years passed like a long Alaskan winter, each season bringing changes that shaped Edmund and McKenna's separate lives, while never fully erasing their shared past. The wooden heart and elephant carving, though miles apart, remained constant reminders of what they had lost and what they still carried within their hearts. Edmund threw himself into his marine research with an intensity that both impressed and concerned his colleagues. His work took him to the furthest reaches of the Pacific, studying whale migration patterns and the impact of climate change on marine ecosystems. The quiet of the open ocean became his sanctuary, the rhythmic sounds of waves and whale songs replacing the piano melodies that had once filled his life. His reputation in the scientific community grew steadily. Publications in prestigious journals bore his name, and his research methods became standard practice in marine biology circles. He developed new technologies for tracking whale communications. His understanding of their songs deepened by years of listening to their haunting melodies across vast ocean spaces. The small research vessel he commanded became his home more often than not. Its cabin walls were covered with charts and data printouts, but in a small, waterproof box beneath his bunk, he kept the wooden elephant carving safe. Sometimes, during long nights at sea, he would hold it in his palm, remembering the snow-covered day when a young girl with bright eyes had given it to him. Meanwhile, McKenna's career soared to heights even she hadn't imagined possible. Her debut season with the New York Philharmonic earned critical acclaim. Her unique style of playing drawing praise for its emotional depth and innovation. Critics noted how she seemed to weave natural rhythms into classical pieces, though few knew these patterns had their origins in whale songs and ocean waves. The wooden heart never left her neck, becoming something of a trademark. Music journalists speculated about its significance, but McKenna kept its story private, touching it like a talisman before each performance. Her compositions began to gain recognition, especially pieces that combined classical structures with elements inspired by nature, though she never explicitly mentioned their connection to her time in Alaska. Their paths never quite crossed, though they moved in ever-widening circles. Edmund would sometimes hear McKenna's name on NPR while adjusting his ship's radio, coverage of her latest concert or composition filtering across the airwaves. McKenna would occasionally spot Edmund's name in scientific journals left in green rooms before performances, his research making headlines in environmental circles. Life continued to move forward for both of them. Edmund's research base shifted from Sitka to larger facilities in Seattle and Vancouver, though he spent more time at sea than on land. His work became increasingly crucial as climate change accelerated, his data helping to establish protected marine areas across the Pacific. During one particularly significant research voyage, studying the impact of warming waters on whale migration routes, Edmund found himself recording a pod of humpbacks whose songs seemed to carry an unusual melody. As he listened through his hydrophone, he realized the pattern reminded him of one of McKenna's early compositions, the piece she had written about their first winter together. That night, alone in his cabin, he pulled out his laptop and, for the first time in years, searched for her name online. The screen filled with images of her performances, reviews of her compositions, and interviews about her innovative approach to classical music. In every photo, he could spot the wooden heart hanging around her neck, and his own hand instinctively went to the elephant carving in his pocket. Makena's life in New York evolved into something she had never imagined for herself. Her apartment overlooking Central Park became a gathering place for musicians and artists, its walls adorned with photographs of performances and awards. But in her bedroom, on a small shelf visible only to her, sat a framed picture of a snowman named Zawadi, built by two children who believed in forever. She dated occasionally, as did Edmund, but these relationships never deepened into anything significant. How could they explain to others that their hearts were still partially anchored in a past they had chosen to leave behind? The wooden heart and elephant carving became their secret keepers, holding memories too precious to share but too painful to forget. Their mutual friends in Sitka kept them loosely informed of each other's lives, though neither actively sought information. They learned to navigate questions about their past with practiced grace, acknowledging their history while maintaining the distance they had chosen. Their old cottage overlooking the Sound remained untouched, neither able to decide its fate. 5 years into their separation, Edmund's research brought him to New York for a climate change conference. He spent an entire afternoon standing outside Carnegie Hall, where Makena was scheduled to perform that evening. The familiar weight of the elephant carving in his pocket seemed heavier than usual as he debated buying a ticket. In the end, he returned to his hotel, knowing they weren't ready for that reunion. That same year, Makena's concert tour took her to Seattle, just miles from where Edmund's research vessel was docked. She found herself driving past the Marine Biology Center, her fingers automatically touching the wooden heart as she spotted research boats in the harbor. She wondered if any of them were his, but couldn't bring herself to stop and find out. Their professional lives continued to flourish in parallel. Edmund's research led to breakthrough discoveries about whale communication and the effects of ocean acidification. His work influenced international marine protection policies, and his name became synonymous with innovative approaches to marine biology research. Makena's musical career reached new heights as she began composing full symphonies. Her pieces, which critics praise for their unique blend of classical structure and natural rhythms, were performed by orchestras around the world. She established a foundation to bring musical education to underprivileged children, remembering her own journey from Kenya to Alaska to the world's greatest concert halls. 7 years after their separation, their paths nearly crossed at an environmental benefit concert in London. Makena was performing an original composition inspired by ocean conservation, while Edmund was scheduled to speak about his research. They both cancelled at the last minute, each making excuses that didn't quite ring true to those who knew their history. Their old friends in Sitka watched their separate successes with mixed emotions. The town that had witnessed their love story from the beginning kept track of both their achievements, proud of what they had accomplished, but sad at the cost of their separation. Their story became something of a bittersweet legend told to visiting tourists when they asked about the empty cottage overlooking the Sound. 8 years into their silence, Edmund published a groundbreaking paper on whale song patterns that revolutionized the field's understanding of cetacean communication. In the acknowledgements, hidden among thanks to colleagues and research institutions, was a single line, "To M.R., who first taught me to hear the music in nature's rhythms." Few readers understood the reference, but somewhere in New York, Makena's fingers touched the wooden heart as she read those words in a copy of National Geographic. That same year, Makena premiered a symphony titled Arctic Dreams with the London Philharmonic. Music critics praised its innovative structure, noting how it seemed to capture the essence of northern wilderness and lost love. In the program notes, she included a dedication for E.M., who showed me how science and art could dance together. Edmund's colleagues noticed him holding the elephant carving during the public radio broadcast of the premiere. 9 years passed and their silence became a familiar weight they both carried. Their achievements continued to accumulate. Edmund's research expanding across the Pacific, McKenna's music reaching new audiences worldwide. They learned to live with the quiet spaces in their hearts where their shared dreams had once lived. Their separate lives developed rhythms of their own. Edmund's research took him from the Aleutian Islands to the coast of Japan, his understanding of marine ecosystems growing deeper with each expedition. The ocean became his home, its vast spaces echoing the emptiness he carried within. McKenna's music evolved to incorporate influences from her travels around the world, but listeners often noted a recurring motif in her compositions, a melody that seemed to capture the sound of waves and whale songs. She never explained its origin, but her hand would often touch the wooden heart when these passages played. Their 10th year of separation brought changes neither expected. Climate change concerns were bringing marine biology into the spotlight, and Edmund's research became increasingly crucial to international conservation efforts. His work caught the attention of major environmental organizations, leading to speaking engagements and conferences. McKenna's career reached a new milestone as she was commissioned to compose a piece for a major climate change awareness event in Sitka. The invitation forced her to confront the possibility of returning to the town she had left behind, to the place where her heart had first learned to sing with the rhythms of the sea. As their parallel lives approached the 10-year mark of their separation, forces beyond their control began to draw them back to where their story had begun. The wooden heart and elephant carving, carried faithfully through a decade of silence, seemed to pulse with renewed energy, as if sensing the approaching end of their time apart. The decade of silence had shaped them both, carving new facets into their characters while never quite erasing the imprints they had left on each other's souls. Their love story had become something of a legend in both the scientific and musical communities, though few knew the full truth of what they had shared and lost. As the 10th winter of their separation approached, destiny began weaving the threads of their lives back together, preparing for a reunion neither of them saw coming. The wooden heart and elephant carving had waited patiently through 10 years of silence, keeping safe the promises of 2 children who had believed in forever, waiting for the moment when their paths would cross again. Chapter 9. Fate's Hand. A climate change conference in Sitka brought Edmund home after years of research across the Pacific. The timing seemed orchestrated by fate itself. The conference organizers had commissioned McKenna to perform at the opening ceremony, her music chosen to underscore the urgency of environmental protection. Neither knew of the other's scheduled appearance until it was too late to change plans. The autumn air carried a familiar crispness as Edmund's research vessel approached Sitka Sound. The town's skyline remained largely unchanged, though his perspective had shifted with the years. The elephant carving sat heavy in his pocket as memories flooded back, childhood snowball fights, teenage kisses, and a love that had seemed as eternal as the mountains watching over the harbor. McKenna's arrival the day before the conference stirred similar emotions. Her taxi wound through streets that held a lifetime of memories, past their old elementary school, the library where they had shared secret kisses, and finally their cottage on the hill. The wooden heart seemed to pulse against her skin as she caught glimpses of their past around every corner. The conference venue was the newly renovated Sitka Performing Arts Center, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the traditional buildings surrounding it. Edmund arrived early on opening day, his keynote speech notes clutched in one hand, while the other absently touched the elephant carving in his pocket. He found himself scanning the crowd, though he told himself he wasn't looking for anyone in particular. Makena was in one of the practice rooms, running through final rehearsals of her commissioned piece. The composition had poured out of her when she accepted this engagement. A symphony that spoke of ice melting, oceans rising, and the delicate balance of nature disrupted. Only now did she realize how much of their story had woven itself into the music. Their first glimpse of each other came during the opening ceremony. Edmund sat in the front row, his position as keynote speaker making his presence unavoidable. Makena walked onto the stage, the wooden heart catching the spotlight as she took her place at the grand piano. Time seemed to stop as their eyes met across the crowded auditorium, a decade of silence suspended in a single breath. The piece she played was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. It began with the gentle sounds of whale songs translated into piano notes. A direct reference to Edmund's research that few would understand. The melody built slowly, incorporating themes from their shared past. The rhythm of waves against their cottage shore, the haunting echo of Alaskan winter winds, the harmonic complexity of the northern lights they had watched together. Edmund sat transfixed, recognizing the patterns from his research woven into her music. Each note seemed to carry a message meant only for him, speaking of things they had left unsaid. His hand clutched the elephant carving as memories washed over him with each phrase of the music. As the final notes faded, the audience erupted in applause, but Edmund and Makena remained locked in a moment outside of time. She finally broke eye contact to take her bow, the wooden heart swinging forward with the motion, catching the light just as it had on their wedding day. The conference schedule kept them apart for most of the day. Edmund delivered his keynote speech on the alarming changes in whale migration patterns, his research highlighting the urgent need for environmental action. From her seat in the back of the auditorium, Makena watched the passionate scientist he had become, seeing echoes of the boy who had once taught her about tide pools. During the evening reception, they orbited each other like binary stars, moving in patterns that kept them close but never quite touching. Their colleagues noticed the tension, though few knew the history behind it. The wooden heart and elephant carving seemed to pulse in rhythm, drawing them inevitably toward each other. Their first words came in a quiet moment by the refreshment table. Edmund reached for a glass of water just as Makena set hers down. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending a jolt of electricity through both of them that had nothing to do with static. "Your performance was incredible," Edmund said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 10 years' silence. "You incorporated the whale songs perfectly." Makena's smile held a hint of their shared past. "I had a good teacher. Your research, it's amazing what you've accomplished, Edmund." The use of his name after so long nearly undid him. They stood in awkward silence, both aware of the eyes watching them, both feeling the pull of their shared history and the weight of their separate lives. "Would you—" Edmund hesitated, then gathered his courage. "Would you like to get some coffee? To catch up properly?" The question hung between them like frost in the air. Makena's hand went to the wooden heart, a gesture Edmund recognized from their years together. "I'd like that," she replied quietly. They found themselves at their old favorite cafe, which had somehow survived the decade unchanged. The same mismatched cups, the same creaky floorboards, the same view of the harbor where fishing boats bobbed in the evening light. Sitting across from each other, they began the delicate dance of reconnection. They spoke of their professional lives first, safer ground than the personal history that hung heavy in the air between them. Edmund described his research breakthroughs, while Makena shared stories of concert halls and compositions. "I heard your piece," Edmund said suddenly, "Arctic Dreams. I was on a research vessel in the Bering Sea when it premiered on public radio." Makena's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. "I read your paper on whale communication patterns. The acknowledgement. I recognized myself in those initials. Their eyes met over their cooling coffee, years of unspoken words passing between them. The wooden heart and elephant carving seemed to hum with energy, like compass needles finally pointing true north. "Do you ever—" Makina began, then stopped, gathering her thoughts. "Do you ever wonder if we made the right choice?" Edmund's hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, feeling the familiar contours of the elephant. "Every day," he admitted, "but I also know we needed to become who we are now. Your music has touched thousands of lives. My research is helping protect the oceans we both love." "We were so young," Makina said softly, "thinking we had to choose between our dreams and our love." "Maybe we weren't wrong," Edmund replied, his voice gentle. "Maybe we just needed time to grow into people who could hold both." The conversation flowed more easily after that, years of silence melting away like spring ice. They shared pictures on their phones, Edmund's research expeditions, Makina's performances. Their separate lives laid out on the cafe table, no longer feeling like barriers between them. As evening deepened into night, they found themselves walking familiar streets. Their feet carried them naturally toward their old cottage, still standing empty after all these years. They stopped at the fence, both aware of the symbolism of this moment. "I couldn't sell it," Edmund admitted. "Couldn't even come back here to pack everything up properly." "Neither could I," Makina whispered. "It felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit." The northern lights began to dance across the sky, nature offering its own commentary on their reunion. Edmund and Makina stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights paint the harbour in shades of green and purple, just as they had done countless times before. "The conference runs for 3 more days," Edmund said finally, his voice careful. Would you like to have dinner tomorrow? There's so much more to talk about." Makina's smile held a warmth he had missed for 10 years. "I'd like that," she replied. "We have a lot of catching up to do." As they parted ways that night, something had shifted between them. The wooden heart seemed lighter around Makina's neck, the elephant carving warmer in Edmund's pocket. They had changed during their years apart, grown into their separate strengths, but perhaps those changes had made them better suited for each other than ever before. Neither knew what the future held, but for the first time in 10 years, they both felt the possibility of something they had thought lost forever. Their love story, which had begun with 2 children building a snowman, had weathered separation and silence. Now, like the tide returning to shore, they found themselves drawn back to where it all began. The chapter of their reunion was just beginning, but already it held more promise than either had dared to hope. In Sitka, where their story had started, fate had brought them full circle. The wooden heart and elephant carving, faithful companions through their years apart, seemed to buzz with renewed purpose, as if sensing that their long wait might finally be coming to an end. Chapter 10. The Rainy Reunion. That night, as rain pelted the windows of their old favorite cafe, Edmund and Makina talked until closing time. The wooden heart and elephant carving, carried faithfully through 10 years of silence, seemed to pulse with renewed energy as their bearers rediscovered the rhythm of conversation that had once come so naturally. They had spent the past 3 days moving in parallel at the climate conference, Edmund delivering presentations on marine ecology, Makina performing pieces commissioned for various sessions. Their professional paths crossed repeatedly, each interaction charged with unspoken words and shared memories. Now, on the final evening of the conference, they found themselves seeking shelter from a sudden Alaskan storm in the cafe where they had spent countless hours as teenagers. The same old brass bell chimed as they entered, shaking raindrops from their coats. The elderly owner, Mrs. Peterson, recognized them immediately, her eyes widening at seeing them together again after so many years. "Your usual table is open," she said with a knowing smile, gesturing to the corner window seat that had been their spot throughout high school and early marriage. The view of the harbour was obscured by the rain, but the familiar setting brought back a flood of memories. Edmund ordered their old favourites without thinking: strong black coffee for himself, honey lavender tea for Makina. Some habits, it seemed, remained unchanged by time. They settled into their seats, the warm lights of the cafe creating a cosy bubble that seemed to exist outside of time. "I watched your presentation today," Makina said, wrapping her hands around her steaming cup. "The way you explained the impact of changing ocean temperatures on whale migration patterns, you made complex science accessible to everyone. You've always had that gift." Edmund smiled, remembering how he used to explain marine biology concepts to her using musical metaphors. "And I saw how the audience responded to your performance at the closing ceremony. The piece about Arctic ice melting, it made people feel the urgency of climate change in a way no amount of data could convey." The wooden heart caught the light as Makina leaned forward. "That piece, it came from memories of our walks along the shore, watching the ice break up in spring. Everything I compose still carries echoes of Alaska, of us." Edmund's hand went to his pocket, feeling the familiar contours of the elephant carving. "The ocean never lets me forget either. Sometimes when I'm recording whale songs, I hear patterns that remind me of your piano playing." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows in a rhythm that seemed to underscore their conversation. The cafe slowly emptied as other patrons hurried home, but Edmund and Makina remained, lost in the process of rediscovery. They shared stories from their years apart: Edmund's research breakthroughs, Makina's performances around the world, but more importantly, they shared the quiet moments, the times when success felt hollow, because they couldn't share it with each other. "Do you remember," Edmund asked, "the night we sat here working on college applications? You were so nervous about your Juilliard audition piece." Makina laughed softly. "And you were convinced the University of Alaska would reject you, even though your marine biology project had won every science fair for 3 years running." "We were so young," Edmund mused, "so sure we could conquer the world together." "We did conquer it," Makina replied, her voice gentle, "just not in the way we expected." The conversation flowed naturally into deeper waters. They spoke of their separation, the pain of choosing between their dreams and their love, the way success had seemed bittersweet without each other to share it. "I used to read about your research in scientific journals," Makina admitted. "I'd find copies in concert hall green rooms and always check the marine biology sections first." "I have recordings of all your major performances," Edmund confessed. "I'd play them on my research vessel during long nights at sea." The rain continued its steady percussion as they ordered second cups, then thirds. Mrs. Peterson kept the cafe open well past closing time, pretending to clean nearby tables while discreetly wiping away tears at witnessing their reunion. They spoke of their current lives, Edmund's ongoing research projects, Makina's upcoming performances. The future they had once planned together hung unspoken between them, like sheet music waiting to be played. "The foundation I'm starting," Makina said hesitantly, "to bring music education to coastal communities. I could use someone who understands marine science to help develop the curriculum." Edmund's heart quickened at the implicit invitation. "My research base is moving to Seattle," he replied. "It would be closer to many of the communities you're targeting." The wooden heart seemed to glow in the cafe's warm light as Makina leaned forward. "We're not the same people we were 10 years ago." "No," Edmund agreed, his hand closing around the elephant carving. "We're better, stronger, maybe more ready for each other." Finally, as midnight approached, Mrs. Peterson reluctantly informed them she needed to close. They stood, suddenly awkward, neither wanting the evening to end. Edmund reached for his coat, and in a gesture that sparked déjà vu, offered it to McKenna just as he had done countless times before. The rain had softened to a gentle mist as they stepped outside. The street was deserted, the wet pavement reflecting the glow of streetlights like stars fallen to earth. They stood close together under the cafe's awning, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "My flight back to New York isn't until tomorrow evening," McKenna said softly, her hand touching the wooden heart. "I know a place that serves great breakfast," Edmund replied, hope creeping into his voice, "if you're free in the morning." Their eyes met in the rain-washed night, decades of history passing between them. The wooden heart and elephant carving seemed to pulse in synchronization, like two hearts finding their shared rhythm again. Edmund offered to drive her back to her hotel, just as he had done after their first date in high school. His rental car still smelled new, but the sensation of McKenna sitting in the passenger seat felt wonderfully familiar. They drove slowly through the rainy streets, past landmarks of their shared history, their old high school, the library where they had shared secret kisses, the church where they had married. Finally, they pulled up outside her hotel, the engine's quiet purr the only sound besides the falling rain. "Thank you," McKenna said softly, "for tonight, for remembering who we were, and for seeing who we've become." Edmund turned toward her, his glacier-blue eyes meeting her dark ones. 10 years ago, we thought we had to choose between our dreams and our love. Maybe now we're wise enough to have both." The wooden heart caught the streetlight as McKenna leaned closer. "Breakfast tomorrow?" "I'll pick you up at 9, Edmund replied, his smile carrying years of hope. As they parted ways for the night, something had shifted between them. The rain continued to fall, but it felt cleansing rather than melancholy, washing away the dust of 10 years' silence. In their separate rooms that night, neither slept much. McKenna sat at the hotel window, watching the rain and holding the wooden heart, while Edmund stood on his balcony with the elephant carving, letting the soft mist remind him of countless Alaskan nights spent with her. The chapter of their rainy reunion was ending, but it felt more like a prelude than a conclusion. Tomorrow would bring breakfast and new conversations, new possibilities. The wooden heart and elephant carving, carried faithfully through years of separation, seemed to hum with anticipation, as if sensing that their long journey might finally be leading them home. Chapter 11. Surrender to Truth. In the shelter of Edmund's car, watching the storm rage outside, their carefully constructed walls began to crumble. 10 years of success and achievement, of accolades and recognition, suddenly felt hollow in the face of this moment. The wooden heart around McKenna's neck seemed to pulse with each beat of her racing heart, while the elephant carving in Edmund's pocket felt warm against his palm. "I've spent 10 years becoming successful," McKenna whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain drumming on the car roof. "Published compositions, worldwide performances, everything I dreamed of achieving. But I've never felt like a success without you." Edmund's hand found hers in the dim light, their fingers intertwining naturally as if they had never been apart. The contact sent electricity through both of them, awakening memories of countless similar moments shared in their youth. "Every research breakthrough," Edmund replied softly, "every discovery, every publication. I would reach for the phone to tell you first, only to remember I couldn't." The rain intensified, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Through the water-streaked windows, the lights of Sitka blurred into an impressionistic painting of their hometown. The same streets where they had built snowmen, shared first kisses, and eventually said goodbye now witnessed their reunion. "Do you remember," McKenna asked, her free hand touching the wooden heart, "what you said to me the day we met, when you gave me this?" Edmund smiled in the darkness. "That my dad said when you give someone your heart, it means you'll be friends forever." His other hand closed around the elephant carving. "And you gave me this, saying elephants bring wisdom and good luck." Maybe we needed these years apart, McKenna mused, to gain the wisdom to understand what we really had, what we still have. The confession hung between them like mist over the harbour. Edmund turned in his seat to face her, his glacier blue eyes meeting her dark ones in the dim light. I've travelled across every ocean, studied the most complex patterns in nature, but nothing has ever made as much sense as loving you. Tears mixed with raindrops on McKenna's cheeks. I've played in the world's greatest concert halls, created music that moves thousands, but nothing has ever sounded as beautiful as your voice saying my name. The storm outside matched the intensity of emotions within the car. Lightning flashed across the harbour, illuminating their faces in brief, brilliant moments. In those flashes, they saw each other clearly, not just who they had been, but who they had become. I was so afraid, Edmund admitted, his voice rough with emotion, that our love would hold you back from your dreams, that staying in Sitka would clip your wings. And I was terrified that asking you to stay would make you resent me, McKenna responded, that your research would suffer because of our relationship. Another lightning flash, another moment of clarity. We were young, Edmund said, thinking love meant sacrifice, that we had to choose between our passions and each other. But what if love means supporting each other's growth? McKenna's question carried the weight of 10 years' reflection. What if it means finding ways to blend our dreams instead of choosing between them? The wooden heart seemed to grow warmer against McKenna's skin as Edmund gently pulled her closer. The elephant carving in his pocket pressed between them, a reminder of promises made in childhood innocence, but perhaps only now truly understood. Your music has always been part of my research, Edmund confessed. The way you taught me to hear patterns in whale songs, to find rhythm in wave movements. You made me a better scientist. And your understanding of nature's harmony influenced every piece I've ever composed, McKenna replied. The mathematics of ocean currents, the poetry of migration patterns, they're woven into all my music. The rain began to soften, its rhythm gentling like the cadence of their conversation. Edmund's thumb traced circles on McKenna's hand, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. I've had relationships over the years, he said quietly, but none of them understood how the ocean speaks to my soul the way you always did. I've dated other musicians, artists who should have understood my passion, McKenna responded, but none of them could harmonize with my heart like you. Another lightning flash, another truth revealed. We're not the same people who said goodbye 10 years ago, Edmund observed. We've grown, changed, become who we were meant to be. Maybe that's exactly why we could work now, McKenna suggested. We're secure in our individual identities, successful in our careers. We don't need each other to be complete. We choose each other to be better. The wooden heart and elephant carving seemed to pulse with agreement, these childhood tokens now witnesses to adult wisdom. The storm outside began to calm, as if nature itself was holding its breath for their next words. My research base is moving to Seattle, Edmund said softly. The Pacific Northwest Marine Biology Institute has offered me a position heading their whale communication study. The Seattle Symphony has been courting me for their composer-in-residence program, McKenna revealed. And my music education foundation could be based anywhere on the coast. Their eyes met in the darkness, hope blooming like dawn after a storm. Seattle has a thriving arts scene, Edmund continued, and some of the best marine research facilities in the world. It's close enough to Sitka for regular visits, McKenna added, close enough to keep our connections here while building something new. The wooden heart glowed in another flash of lightning as McKenna leaned closer. Are we really considering this? Trying again? Edmund's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a mixture of raindrops and tears. I think we've spent 10 years preparing for this moment, growing into people who could love each other better. Their first kiss in a decade was gentle, tentative, like the first notes of a new composition or the initial findings of a research study. But it carried the weight of their history and the promise of their future, as natural as the tide returning to shore. When they finally parted, both were crying freely, years of suppressed emotion finally finding release. The wooden heart and elephant carving seemed to sing with joy, these faithful companions finally witnessing the reunion they had waited so long to see. "It won't be easy," Makina said pragmatically, even as she stayed close in Edmund's embrace. "We'll have to balance our careers, find ways to support each other's dreams without losing ourselves." "We're smarter now," Edmund replied, his voice full of conviction. "We understand that love isn't about sacrifice. It's about growth, about finding harmony between different melodies." The rain had almost stopped, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent that spoke of new beginnings. Through the clearing sky, the northern lights began to dance, painting the harbour in sheets of green and purple. "Look," Edmund whispered, nodding toward the celestial display. "Nature's giving us her blessing." Makena laughed softly, the sound more beautiful to Edmund's ears than any symphony. "As if we needed another sign. The wooden heart and elephant have been trying to tell us this for years." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the aurora dance across the sky. Their hands remained clasped, the wooden heart and elephant carving pressed between their palms like a bridge connecting their past to their future. "I love you," Edmund said simply, the words carrying the weight of decades of history. "I never stopped loving you. Even when I thought letting you go was the right thing to do, my heart kept beating in time with yours." "I love you too," Makena replied, her voice carrying the melody of absolute certainty. "Through every performance, every composition, every success and failure, loving you has been the constant rhythm of my life." The truth they had finally surrendered to settled around them like a warm embrace. Their love story, which had begun with two children building a snowman, had weathered separation and silence to emerge stronger. Like the wooden heart and elephant carving they had exchanged so long ago, their connection had endured, waiting patiently for them to find their way back to each other. As the northern lights continued their celestial dance and the last raindrops fell, Edmund and Makena began planning their future together. This time, they understood that love wasn't about choosing between dreams. It was about creating a symphony of shared aspirations, a harmony of individual passions played together. The wooden heart and elephant carving, faithful companions through years of separation, seemed to glow with satisfaction. Their long vigil was ending, their purpose fulfilled. The truth that Edmund and Makena had finally surrendered to was simple but profound. Sometimes love needs time to grow into its fullest expression, and the longest journeys often lead us right back where we began. Chapter 12. Love's Victory. Their embrace was both an ending and a beginning, tears mixing with the last drops of rain as they held each other close in the growing dawn. The storm that had kept them sheltered in Edmund's car had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and new. The wooden heart and elephant carving, faithful companions through their decade apart, seemed to pulse with joy at their reunion. "We were both wrong," Edmund admitted, his voice gentle against Makena's hair. "Dreams mean nothing without someone to share them with." Makena smiled through her tears, looking up at him with eyes that held both memories and promises. "Perhaps our greatest dream was always each other." The next few months passed in a whirlwind of change and renewal. Edmund's transfer to the Pacific Northwest Marine Biology Institute in Seattle coincided perfectly with Makena's acceptance of the symphony's composer-in-residence position. They found a house overlooking Puget Sound, where the rhythm of waves against the shore provided a constant reminder of their Sitkan beginnings. Their wedding rings, never disposed of during their separation, emerged from their respective hiding places. The gold bands needed polishing, but slipped back onto their fingers as if they had never left. No new ceremony was needed. Their original vows, like their love, had simply been waiting for the right moment to flourish again. Their professional lives blossomed in tandem. Edmund's research expanded to include collaborative projects with music therapists, studying the impact of whale songs on human emotional well-being. Makina's compositions increasingly incorporated natural sounds and rhythms, her music becoming a bridge between art and science. Their old cottage in Sitka found new purpose as a summer retreat, where they hosted workshops combining marine biology education with musical instruction. Children from coastal communities learned about ocean conservation while discovering the music in nature's rhythms, just as Edmund and Makina had taught each other so many years ago. The wooden heart and elephant carving found a place of honor in their new home, displayed together on a shelf where morning light made them glow. These childhood tokens, carried faithfully through years of separation, now stood as testaments to a love that had grown stronger through adversity. One evening, as they sat on their deck, watching the sunset paint the sound in familiar golds and purples, Edmund pulled out an old, weathered notebook. Inside were all the whale songs he had recorded over the years, each one annotated with musical notations in Makina's hand. "I kept adding to it," he confessed. "Even during our years apart, every new pattern I discovered, I could hear how you would translate it into music." Makina touched the wooden heart at her neck, a gesture that had become synonymous with their deepest emotions. "My compositions never stopped featuring whale songs. I think part of me was always composing for you." Their love story became legend in both scientific and artistic circles, proof that passion for career and passion for love could coexist and enhance each other. Young researchers and musicians sought their mentorship, drawn by their unique blend of disciplines and their testament to enduring love. Together, they established the Moses Rosa Foundation for Arts and Marine Science Education, creating opportunities for underprivileged students to explore both fields. The foundation's logo featured a wooden heart and elephant, symbols of the childhood promises that had survived a decade of separation to bloom into something greater. Years passed, and their love continued to deepen and grow. Grey began to thread through Edmund's platinum hair, and laugh lines crinkled around Makina's eyes. But their connection remained as strong as ever. They had learned that love, like the tide, might retreat but always returns, often bringing unexpected treasures with it. Their story became a beacon of hope for others facing similar choices between dreams and love. They proved that sometimes the longest journey leads you right back where you started, but with the wisdom to appreciate what was there all along. The wooden heart and elephant carving watched over their renewed life together, no longer just reminders of childhood promises, but symbols of a love that had matured like fine wine, growing richer and more complex with time. These faithful companions had kept their vigil through years of separation, waiting for their bearers to discover that the greatest dreams are those we dare to share. Epilogue. The legacy. The story of Edmund Moses and Makina Rosa became part of Sitka's folklore, whispered by young lovers and cherished by old romantics. Their journey proved that love, when real, never truly dies. It simply waits for the right moment to bloom again. Their legacy lived on in the lives they touched, in the marine biologists who learned to hear music in the waves, in the musicians who found inspiration in nature's rhythms, and in the countless students who discovered that science and art are simply different languages describing the same beautiful world. The wooden heart and elephant carving, eventually donated to the Sitka Museum, continued to inspire new generations. Displayed together in a case of honor, they stood as testament to a love that began with two children building a snowman and grew into something stronger than time or distance could diminish. In the end, Their story taught that sometimes we need to lose our way to find our truth, that the hardest choices can lead to the greatest growth, and that love, like the northern lights they had watched together so many times, can paint even the darkest sky with colors of hope and joy. Their greatest lesson was simple but profound. True love doesn't require choosing between dreams. It means finding someone whose dreams dance in harmony with your own, creating a symphony more beautiful than either could compose alone. Subscribe if you loved.